The silence in the private dining room of the Pinnacle Club wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. It was the crushing weight of $1 billion deal collapsing in real time. On one side of the mahogany table sat Arthur Vance, the Titan CEO of Vance Global Logistics, his face a mask of thunderous rage. On the other hand, the patriarch of a proud Italian dynasty, Signore Lorenzo Moretti, looked utterly insulted. Between them, a useless translator app sputtered nonsensical phrases. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the corner sounded like a nail being hammered into the coffin of Vance's career-defining merger. Careers were about to end. Fortunes were about to be lost. Nobody knew Italian, and the CEO was losing his patience. And in the corner of the room, a young waitress, clearing away bread plates, was the only person on earth who could save them. But her intervention would cost her more than she could ever imagine. The air in the private dining room, Suite 37B of the Pinnacle Club, was thick enough to choke on. It was a noxious cocktail of expensive cologne, seared scallops, and abject failure. Arthur Vance, founder and CEO of Vance Global Logistics, felt a familiar, hot tremor begin in his jaw. It was the precursor to an eruption, the kind that had made vice presidents twice his age openly weep in board meetings. His glacial blue eyes scanned the table. To his right sat Richard Sterling, his executive VP of acquisitions, whose face was currently the color of spoiled milk. Richard was the one who had assured him, "Arthur, don't worry, I've got the translation covered. We'll use the top-of-the-line enterprise software. It's flawless." Flawless. The word tasted like ash in Vance's mouth. Across the gleaming expanse of mahogany sat their prize, or what was supposed to be their prize, Lorenzo Moretti and his two sons, Matteo and Giovanni. They were the owners of Moretti Navigazione, a legendary Genoese shipping firm that represented the last crucial piece of Vance's Atlantic trade puzzle. The Morettis were old money, old world, and old school. Their company wasn't just a business, it was a 200-year-old legacy forged in salt and steel. Acquiring them wasn't just a transaction, it was an absorption of history, and it required a touch of finesse that was currently and painfully absent. The problem, the billion-dollar career-ending problem, was that the Morettis spoke almost no English. And Arthur Vance, a man who could dissect a corporate balance sheet in 6 languages of finance, spoke precisely 0 Italian. The enterprise software, a sleek tablet propped up on the table, was the source of the disaster. Every time Signore Moretti spoke, his voice a gravelly baritone, rich with the cadence of the Ligurian coast, Richard would point his phone at him. A few seconds later, a robotic, tinny female voice would emanate from the tablet, mangling the Italian patriarch's words into corporate buzzword salad. "The legacy of our shipyards is the soul of our forefathers," Signore Moretti had said with heartfelt passion, gesturing with his hands in that quintessentially Italian way. The app translated this as, "The asset history of our production facilities is the spirit of our dead relatives." Arthur Vance had watched in horror as Lorenzo Moretti's expression soured, his noble brow furrowing in confusion and then offense. Now they were at the critical juncture, the terms of the employee pension fund. It was a major sticking point. The Morettis saw their workers as family. Vance saw them as liabilities on a spreadsheet. Signore Moretti leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. He spoke for a full minute, his tone pleading yet firm. He spoke of honor, of a sacred pact made between his grandfather and the dock workers of Genoa. He spoke of men who had given their lives to the Moretti name and the promise that their families would always be cared for. It was a beautiful, impassioned speech, even to a man who couldn't understand a word of it. Richard aimed the phone. The tablet was processed, and then the tinny voice delivered the final fatal blow. "The male workers are connected to a holy promise. We require financial continuity for their dependents after life termination." Matteo Moretti, the younger son, slammed his hand on the table. "Basta! Enough! This is an insult. Life termination? Do you think we are fools? This machine is butchering the words of our father." Arthur Vance closed his eyes. The tremor in his jaw was now a full-blown earthquake. He envisioned Richard Sterling's career not just ending, but being launched into the cold, dead vacuum of space. How could this happen? Weeks of planning, millions in legal fees, a deal that would cement his legacy as the king of global logistics, all unraveling because of a glorified pocket dictionary. Signore Moretti, Vance began, his voice dangerously low and controlled. He looked at Richard. Tell them. Tell them we have the utmost respect for them. Their holy promises. Richard, sweating profusely, typed frantically into his phone. The tablet chirped, "We value your religious commitments." Lorenzo Moretti pushed his chair back, the sound of wood scraping against marble echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. He spoke in sharp, clipped Italian to his sons. The only word Vance understood was arroganti. Arrogant. The deal was dead. It was over. Vance could feel the billion-dollar prize slipping through his fingers like fine sand. He opened his mouth to unleash the storm on Richard, to fire him in front of everyone, to burn the whole disastrous luncheon to the ground. But before he could utter a single syllable, another voice cut through the tension. It was quiet, soft, and completely unexpected. He didn't say they were holy promises. Every head in the room snapped toward the source of the voice. For the first time all afternoon, Arthur Vance truly noticed the waitress. She had been a phantom, a whisper of motion at the periphery of his vision. He couldn't have described her if his life depended on it. She was just staff. A pair of hands that refilled his San Pellegrino, that cleared away the untouched risotto, that moved with a quiet efficiency designed to make her invisible. Now standing by the credenza with a silver water pitcher in her hand, she was suddenly, shockingly visible. She was young, maybe mid-20s. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple, severe bun, and her uniform, a crisp white shirt and black trousers, was immaculate but anonymous. But it was her eyes that held him. They were a deep, intelligent brown, and right now they were wide with a mixture of terror and resolve, as if she couldn't believe she had just spoken aloud. Richard Sterling was the first to recover. "What did you say? Who do you think you are?" he hissed, his panic instantly curdling into aggression. "Get back to your duties." The girl flinched, her knuckles whitening on the handle of the pitcher. She looked at Vance, her gaze direct, and for a fleeting moment, he saw not a waitress, but an academic about to defend a thesis. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried across the silent room. I just meant that the translation was wrong. It was very wrong." Lorenzo Moretti was staring at her, his expression unreadable. He spoke to her directly, in rapid, questioning Italian. It wasn't a command, but a genuine inquiry. The waitress didn't hesitate. She replied instantly, her Italian flowing with a liquid grace that was utterly absent from the robotic tablet. It was a short, respectful answer, but the effect was instantaneous. A look of profound surprise dawned on Signore Moretti's face. His sons, Matteo and Giovanni, exchanged astonished glances. Arthur Vance felt a strange sensation, a flicker of hope in the smoldering wreckage of the meeting. "What did he say?" he demanded, his voice like a whip crack. "And what did you say to him?" The waitress turned her attention to Vance. She took a deep, centering breath. "Signore Moretti asked me how a young American girl could possibly understand the nuances of the Genoese dialect. He was surprised." "And your answer?" Vance pressed, leaning forward. "I told him, in his dialect, that my grandmother was from Nervi, a village just outside Genoa, and that she never let me forget the language of my ancestors." A lie. A complete and total lie, but it was the only thing she could think of, a plausible fiction, to explain the impossible truth. The room was suspended in a state of disbelief. Richard Sterling looked as if he'd been slapped. Ben Carter, a junior analyst from Vance's team who had been silent the entire time, was staring at the waitress with his mouth agape. Lorenzo Moretti spoke again, this time with a hint of a smile playing on his lips. He gestured from the useless tablet to the waitress. He said a single sentence. Vance looked at the girl. "Well?" She swallowed hard, her gaze flickering for a moment to the half-eaten bread rolls and the discarded linen napkins, the artifacts of her station. Then she looked back at the CEO of Vance Global Logistics. "He said," she translated softly, "perhaps we should discard the machine and listen to the woman with the Genoese soul." For the first time in an hour, Arthur Vance felt the tension in his jaw release. The storm inside him hadn't vanished, but it had changed direction. It was no longer a hurricane of rage. It was a laser beam of focused, desperate curiosity. He looked at the waitress, this anonymous girl in a black and white uniform who had just appeared like a deus ex machina. He didn't know who she was or where she came from. He only knew one thing for certain. She was his last and only chance. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low, intense, commanding. "Elena," she replied. "My name is Elena Rostova." "All right, Elena Rostova," Arthur Vance said, gesturing to the empty chair beside him, the one recently vacated by a now redundant tech consultant. "Your duties have changed. You work for me now. Sit down. You're about to translate a billion-dollar deal. Don't screw it up." Elena felt 100 pairs of eyes on her as she walked the 10 feet from the credenza to the mahogany table. It was the longest journey of her life. Her legs felt like lead, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The pristine white apron she wore suddenly felt like a costume, a ridiculous shroud marking her as an imposter in this world of tailored Italian suits and seven-figure decisions. She sat, her back ramrod straight, in the plush leather chair. It was still warm. She folded her hands in her lap, trying to control their trembling. To her left was Arthur Vance, radiating an aura of such intense pressure it was almost a physical force. Across from her, the three Morettis watched her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. And to her right, Richard Sterling glared at her with pure, unadulterated venom. She had not only shown him up, she had rendered him obsolete. The room waited. The silence stretched, taut and fragile. "Let's go back," Vance commanded, his voice a low growl. "The pensions. What exactly did Signore Moretti say before this machine insulted him?" Elena turned to Lorenzo Moretti, her expression shifting from nervous waitress to focused diplomat. She addressed him with a formal respect that was a world away from the app's butchered syntax. "Signore Moretti," she began in flawless Italian, "sorry for the interruption and the rudeness of this technology. Mr. Vance desires to understand your true position regarding the promise made to your workers. Would you be so gracious as to repeat your thoughts so that I may convey them with the respect they deserve?" The old patriarch's stern facade softened. He nodded slowly, a genuine warmth entering his eyes. He saw that she hadn't just translated the words. She had apologized for the insult and framed Vance's request as a desire for understanding, not a demand for information. He began to speak again. This time Elena listened, not just with her ears, but with her entire being. She watched his hands, the rise and fall of his chest, the subtle shifts in his tone. He wasn't talking about spreadsheets and liabilities. He was weaving a narrative of family, of honor, a concept that had no direct equivalent in American corporate law. He spoke of the shipyard workers not as employees, but as our people. He explained that the pension was not a benefit. It was a continuation of a sacred trust. To abandon it would be to tarnish the name of Moretti, a name that had survived wars, depressions, and the relentless march of time. It was an act he would rather die than commit. When he finished, a profound silence settled over the room once more. All eyes turned to Elena. The pressure was immense. A simple, literal translation would fail. Vance would hear emotion and dismiss it as sentimentality. She had to do more than translate words. She had to translate a worldview. She turned to Arthur Vance. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice clear and steady now, filled with a newfound authority. "Signore Moretti is not discussing the pension fund in terms of its financial mechanics. He is explaining its cultural and moral significance. He used the word honor. It doesn't just mean honor. In this context, it means a legacy of integrity, a reputation that is more valuable to him than the company's stock price." Vance listened, his eyes narrowed, studying her. Elena continued. "He explained that the fund is a pact, made by his grandfather with the first generation of shipbuilders. It's a promise that the Moretti family will always protect the families of our people. He sees his workers and his family as two branches of the same tree. To him, abandoning that pact would be like cutting the roots of that tree. He believes the company would lose its soul and its name would be disgraced in Genoa forever. He said, and this is a direct quote, "A company without its soul is just a fleet of dead steel." Arthur Vance leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He was silent for a long moment. He looked at Lorenzo Moretti, and for the first time, he wasn't seeing a stubborn old man obstructing a deal. He was seeing a king defending his kingdom. A fleet of dead steel. The phrase resonated with him. It was the kind of powerful, poetic language he himself appreciated, but rarely encountered in the sterile world of logistics. "Ask him," Vance said. His tone changed, less demanding, more inquisitive. "Ask him what he proposes. We cannot take on an open-ended, unfunded liability. Our shareholders would revolt," Elena translated, carefully choosing her words in Italian. She avoided the cold, corporate term, unfunded liability. Instead, she framed it as a search for a structure that would protect the workers while also satisfying the logical requirements of a modern public company. The conversation began to flow. For the next 2 hours, Elena was no longer Elena Rostova, the waitress. She was a conduit, a bridge between two worlds. When Vance spoke of synergies and optimization, she translated it into the language of collaboration and strengthening the family. When Moretti spoke of tradition and loyalty, she conveyed it to Vance as brand integrity and proven long-term asset retention. She was a weaver, spinning the coarse thread of American capitalism and the rich silk of Italian heritage into a single cohesive tapestry. She navigated a dozen potential minefields. When the discussion turned to the board of directors, and Vance proposed dissolving the Moretti board, she saw Giovanni Moretti's jaw tighten. Before translating, she added a preface to Vance. "Sir, a word of advice, if I may. In Italy, a position on the board is not just about governance. It is a signifier of family status and respect. A blunt proposal to dissolve it will be seen as an act of conquest. Perhaps we could frame it as creating a new, combined global advisory council where the Moretti family holds esteemed, permanent seats." Vance stared at her, a flicker of genuine astonishment in his eyes. He nodded curtly. "Do it." She did. The tension in the room dissipated. A path forward was emerging from the fog of misunderstanding. They weren't just talking numbers anymore. They were building a relationship, facilitated by the invisible girl who had dared to speak. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the mahogany, they reached a tentative agreement on the major points. A handshake was exchanged, a firm, meaningful one between Vance and Moretti. The deal wasn't signed, but it was alive again, breathing with a newfound sense of mutual respect. As the Morettis prepared to leave, Lorenzo approached Elena. He took her hand in both of his weathered skin warm against hers. He spoke to her in low, gentle Italian, his eyes full of gratitude. Vance watched them, then looked at Richard Sterling, who was trying to make himself as small as possible in his chair. "What did he just say to her?" Vance barked. Richard mumbled, I'm not sure, sir." Elena turned back to the table, a faint blush on her cheeks. "He thanked me," she said quietly. "He said that today, I did not just save a business deal. He said I saved his family's honor from being lost in translation. And he invited me to his family home in Genoa for dinner, whenever I should find myself in Italy." Arthur Vance nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on her. The meeting was over. The crisis was averted. But for him, a much larger and more intriguing mystery had just begun. Who was Elena Rostova? How did a waitress from the Pinnacle Club possess the linguistic skills of a UN diplomat and the cultural intelligence of a Harvard anthropologist? He knew two things with absolute certainty. He was going to close this deal, and he was not letting this girl go. The Morettis departed, leaving a palpable sense of relief and exhaustion in their wake. The moment the door clicked shut, the carefully constructed professionalism of the room shattered. Ben Carter, the junior analyst, let out a long, slow breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. Richard Sterling slumped in his chair, looking utterly defeated. Arthur Vance, however, seemed to draw energy from the resolution. He stood up, a predator who had just resecured his prey. He ignored Sterling completely, his entire focus directed at Elena, who was standing uncertainly, as if unsure whether she should revert to being a waitress and start clearing the table. "My office, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp," Vance said. It wasn't a request. He pulled out a platinum business card. "1 Vance Plaza, 50th floor. Don't be late." He turned to leave, then paused, his hand on the doorknob. He looked back at her, his blue eyes analytical, piercing. "And Miss Rostova," he added, his voice dropping to a confidential tone that made the hairs on her arm stand up. "Come prepared to tell me who you really are, because I assure you, I am not buying the story about your grandmother from Nervi." With that, he was gone, leaving Elena alone with the wreckage of the luncheon and the 2 remaining members of his team. The silence that followed was thick with Sterling's humiliation. He finally looked at Elena, his face a contorted mask of fury and resentment. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he spat, his voice dripping with vitriol. "Coming out of nowhere, making me look like a fool. You have no idea what you've just stepped into. You're a waitress. You serve coffee. You don't get to play at this level." Elena met his gaze, her fear replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. "I didn't do it to make you look like a fool, Mr. Sterling. You managed that all on your own with your translation app. I did it because your incompetence was about to cost your boss $1 billion and insult a good man." Sterling's face turned purple. He took a step towards her, his finger jabbing the air. "You're finished. I'll call the manager of this club. I'll have you fired for insubordination, for interfering. I think you should probably leave now, Richard." The voice came from Ben Carter, the junior analyst. He had risen from his seat and was standing beside Elena. He was young, probably no older than she was, and his suit, unlike Vance's or Sterling's, looked like it was his first real one. But his expression was firm. "You stay out of this, Carter," Sterling snarled. "You're a glorified intern. And you're a vice president who was just saved by a waitress," Ben countered, his voice steady. "I think Mr. Vance made his preference pretty clear. If you cause a problem for her now, who do you think he's going to back? The woman who saved his deal, or the man who almost sank it? You should go home and update your resume." The truth of Ben's words hit Sterling like a physical blow. He deflated, the rage draining out of him, replaced by the cold, stark terror of his own precarious position. He gave Elena one last look of pure hatred before grabbing his briefcase and storming out of the room without another word. Elena turned to Ben, her composure finally cracking. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Don't thank me," he said with a wry, tired smile. "I've wanted to say something like that to him for 6 months. You were amazing there. Seriously, I've never seen anything like it." He paused, his curiosity getting the better of him. "So Mr. Vance was right, wasn't he? There's no grandmother from Nervi." Elena managed a weak smile, shaking her head. No grandmother from Nervi." She looked around the opulent room at the half-finished plates and crystal glasses. It felt like a different world from the one she inhabited just a few hours ago. I should probably get back to work," she said, her muscle memory kicking in. Ben put a gentle hand on her arm. "I don't think you work here anymore," he said softly. "You work at Vance Global now. You just don't know it yet." The next morning, Elena stood before the monolithic black skyscraper of 1 Vance Plaza. It was a spear of glass and steel piercing the New York sky, a monument to the kind of power and ambition she had only ever read about. Dressed in the only professional outfit she owned, a simple black dress and a worn but clean blazer she'd bought at a thrift store, she felt like a fraud. The business card in her hand felt heavier than a gold bar. The elevator ride to the 50th floor was a silent, stomach-churning ascent. The doors opened onto a reception area of minimalist perfection. White marble floors, a sprawling abstract painting, and a view that encompassed all of Manhattan. A severe-looking assistant led her down a long hallway to a pair of enormous oak doors. "Mr. Vance will see you now." Arthur Vance's office was less an office and more a command center. One entire wall was glass, offering a godlike view of the city below. The desk was a slab of polished granite, empty save for a laptop and a single perfect white orchid. Vance himself was not behind it. He was standing by the window looking out, his back to her. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Elena did, the soft click of the latch sounding like a vault ceiling. "I did some digging last night, Elena Rostova," Vance said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "It's amazing what you can find when you have the resources. It turns out you are remarkably difficult to find. There are no credit cards in your name, no social media presence to speak of. You pay for everything in cash. You live in a fifth-floor walk-up in Queens. You are, for all intents and purposes, a ghost." He finally turned to face her, his eyes pinning her in place. "But ghosts leave traces. I found one. A record from 7 years ago. A dissertation submitted to Columbia University. Codex and Culture, the lingua franca of maritime commerce in the Genoese Republic. It was awarded the prestigious Bancroft Prize. The author's name was Dr. Elena Rostova." He took a step towards her. "So the question isn't how you speak such perfect Italian. The question, Dr. Rostova, is what in God's name a woman with your mind is doing serving canapes to men like Richard Sterling?" The dam inside Elena finally broke. The carefully constructed walls she had built around her past, the lies and omissions she used to survive, all came crumbling down under the weight of his direct, unblinking gaze. The story, the real story, came spilling out. "My father was a history professor," Elena began, her voice barely audible. The opulent office, the view of the sprawling city, all of it faded away, replaced by the scent of old books and chalk dust that had defined her childhood. "He wasn't famous, but he was brilliant. He taught at a small liberal arts college upstate. He loved languages, history, the stories that objects and words could tell. He's the one who taught me Italian, French, Latin. He said that learning a language wasn't about memorizing words. It was about unlocking a new way to see the world." She paused, gathering herself. It was a story she hadn't told anyone in years. "I followed in his footsteps. I was a star academic, full scholarship to Columbia for my PhD. My dissertation on Genoese maritime linguistics. It was my passion. I spent 2 years in the archives in Genoa, living on pasta and coffee, deciphering 14th century shipping manifests. I wasn't just translating words, I was resurrecting a world. The Bancroft Prize, it was supposed to be the beginning of everything. I had offers from Yale, from the Met, a fellowship at the Villa I Tatti in Florence." She looked up at Vance, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I was on top of the world. And then the phone rang." Vance remained silent, his expression unreadable, letting her speak. "It was my mother. My father had collapsed in the middle of a lecture. It was a glioblastoma, the most aggressive form of brain cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months." She took a shaky breath. "He didn't have great insurance, an academic's plan at a small college. It didn't cover the experimental treatments, the specialized care he needed. We sold their house. We drained their retirement accounts. It wasn't enough. The bills were astronomical. They were like a tidal wave, drowning us. The fellowship in Florence, the curator position at the Met, they were prestigious, but they didn't pay much. Not at first. They were for people who had family money, who could afford to be brilliant on a small stipend. I couldn't. I needed cash. Now. So I made a choice. I turned down the fellowships. I withdrew my name from the academic positions. I came back home and took the first job I could find that paid cash daily and had flexible hours so I could be with him. That job was waiting tables. Then I took another, washing dishes, then a third, cleaning apartments. I worked 18-hour days running on 4 hours of sleep and caffeine. The world of academia, of Dr. Elena Rostova, it ceased to exist. I became a ghost, just like you said, because I couldn't bear for any of my old colleagues or professors to see what had become of me." She finally looked away from him, her gaze fixed on the city below. "He fought for 2 years. 2 years I bought for him with my tips and my aching feet. We had breakfast together every morning, and I'd read to him from his history books when he could no longer see the words. He passed away 3 years ago. By then, the debt was insurmountable. I just kept working. It was all I knew how to do. One job to the next. The Pinnacle Club was the best I could get. It was steady, anonymous." She fell silent. The story hung in the air between them, stark and heavy. She had confessed her entire hidden life to this powerful, intimidating stranger. She expected pity or perhaps dismissal. She had just admitted that her entire life was a monument to failure, a story of squandered potential. Arthur Vance did something she did not expect. He walked over to a small concealed bar, poured 2 glasses of water, and handed one to her. "Your father," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Did he know what you gave up for him?" Elena shook her head. "I never told him. I let him believe I was on a research sabbatical. He died believing I was in Florence, living my dream. It was the last gift I could give him." Vance took a long sip of his water, his gaze distant. For a moment, the ruthless CEO vanished, replaced by someone more contemplative, more human. "My own father," Vance said quietly, "worked in a steel mill in Pittsburgh his whole life. He breathed in soot and asbestos for 40 years so I could go to college. He died of emphysema a month before I closed my first major deal. He never saw any of this." He swept his hand, indicating the office, the skyscraper, the city. "He made a promise to himself that his son would have a better life. And you made a promise to your father that you would save him." He looked at her, and the intensity was back in his eyes, but it was different now. It wasn't suspicion, it was assessment. It was a calculation. "You don't have squandered potential, Dr. Rostova," he said, his voice regaining its usual steel. "You have proven, under the most extreme pressure imaginable, that you are capable of honoring a commitment. You sacrificed your own ambition for the sake of your family's honor. You understand the meaning of loyalty. You understand the world that Lorenzo Moretti comes from better than anyone on my payroll. In fact," he added, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face, "you may be the most qualified person I have ever met." He walked back to his granite desk and leaned against it, crossing his arms. "Yesterday you translated a conversation. It was impressive. But that's not what I need. I don't need a translator. I need an interpreter. Of culture, of history, of people. I need someone who understands that a deal isn't just about the numbers on a page. It's about the stories behind them." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Richard Sterling's employment at Vance Global was terminated an hour ago. That creates an opening. Not his job. His was the job of a sycophant. I'm creating a new position." He pushed himself off the desk and stood before her, the most powerful man she had ever met. "Dr. Rostova, I would like to offer you the position of Director of Cultural Liaisons, Special Advisor to the CEO. You will report directly to me. Your first task will be to fly to Genoa next week and finalize the Moretti merger. Not as a translator, but as my chief negotiator. I will give you a salary that will clear your debts in 6 months. I will give you a platform to use your mind in a way you have only dreamed of. I am offering you your life back." He extended his hand. "So, Elena, do we have a deal?" The air in Genoa smelled of salt, diesel, and focaccia. It was a world away from the sterile, air-conditioned luxury of the Pinnacle Club. Elena stood on the balcony of her suite at the Grand Hotel Miramar, overlooking the shimmering Ligurian Sea. A week ago, her biggest concern had been whether she'd make enough in tips to cover her rent. Now she was staring at the same sea that the Moretti family had commanded for centuries, holding the fate of their legacy in her hands. The transition had been a whirlwind. One handshake with Arthur Vance had set in motion a machine she could scarcely comprehend. Within hours, a team had descended upon her life. A lawyer to handle her outstanding debts. A personal stylist who replaced her thrift store wardrobe with impeccably tailored suits and silk blouses. An executive assistant who booked her flights and handed her a new corporate Amex card. She had moved from a fifth-floor walk-up in Queens to this palace of old-world European charm. It felt disorienting, like a dream from which she was terrified of waking. Vance had been true to his word. He wasn't looking for a translator. He had armed her with the full financial and legal details of the proposed merger, but his final instruction had been simple. Close it. Don't just get their signature on our terms. Make them want to sign. Make them feel like this is a victory, not a surrender. You know how they think. Use it. Her first meeting was not in a boardroom, but at the Moretti family's private villa, nestled in the hills above the city. Lorenzo Moretti himself greeted her at the door, not as a business associate, but as an honored guest. Dottoressa Rostova, he said, his smile genuine as he kissed her hand. Welcome to my home. My wife insists you stay for dinner. She is making pesto the old way, with the mortar and pestle. Over a meal that lasted 3 hours, they spoke of everything but the deal. They talked about art, about the history of Genoa, about her dissertation. Elena found herself effortlessly conversing with Lorenzo about the subtle shifts in 14th century maritime contracts, a topic that would have made Arthur Vance's eyes glaze over. She saw Matteo and Giovanni, who had been so tense and hostile in New York, relax in her presence. She wasn't an American corporate raider. She was the dottoressa, a woman who understood and respected their world. The real negotiations began the next day at the Moretti Navigazione headquarters overlooking the bustling port. But the dynamic was entirely different. Elena had established trust. She began not by presenting Vance's terms, but by presenting her understanding of their fears. Signore Moretti, she started, spreading out not a contract, but a series of historical maps of the port. Vance Global is not here to erase the Moretti name from these docks. It is here to ensure that name is read on every major shipping lane in the world for the next 200 years. For 3 days she worked. She anticipated every cultural sticking point. When the American lawyer sent over a standard 300-page contract full of aggressive adversarial language, she refused to present it. This reads like a declaration of war, she told Vance over a late-night video call. It's full of phrases like, in the event of a breach, an indemnification against all claims. The Morettis see a contract as a marriage vow, a statement of mutual trust. This is a prenuptial agreement written by a divorce lawyer. It will kill the deal. Vance, to her surprise, listened. Then rewrite it, he ordered. So she did. She spent a full day with the legal teams, reframing the clauses. Adversarial terms became mutual assurances. Penalties became rebalancing commitments. She worked with the Morettis to create a new Moretti Heritage Committee to be chaired by Lorenzo himself, which would have permanent oversight of the shipyards and the pension fund, ensuring its sanctity. It was a concession that cost Vance nothing in terms of operational control, but was priceless in terms of honor. The final sticking point was the company name. Vance's team insisted on a full rebrand to Vance Global, Genoa. It was non-negotiable. Elena knew this would be seen as the ultimate insult, a final act of conquest. She went to Lorenzo Moretti's office alone. On his wall was a massive, beautiful oil painting of the first ship his great-great-grandfather had ever built, the Stella Genova, the Star of Genoa. Signore, Elena said softly, Mr. Vance is a man of logic, not poetry. He sees a single, unified brand as a symbol of strength and efficiency. It is a symbol of erasure, Moretti countered, his voice heavy with sadness. I know, Elena agreed, which is why we will not be naming the new entity Vance Global, Genoa. That is the name of the holding company on paper, a name for the stock market, but the ships themselves, they are the soul of the company, and the soul should have its own name. She paused, then delivered her gambit. The European fleet operating from this port will be christened the Moretti Vance Line, and every single new vessel commissioned from this shipyard will bear a name beginning with Stella, the Star of the Sea, the Star of the North. The Moretti star will not be extinguished. It will become a constellation that circles the globe. Lorenzo Moretti stared at her, his dark eyes searching her face. He saw no deception, only a profound and brilliant understanding. He slowly walked to the window, looking down at the shipyard his family had built. He saw the cranes, the dry docks, the massive container ships bearing his family's name. He imagined them not just here, but in Shanghai, in Los Angeles, in Sydney, each one a star of Genoa. A slow smile spread across his face. He turned back to Elena. Dottoressa, he said, his voice thick with emotion, you have not just saved this deal. You have honored my family. Let us sign the papers. When Elena called Arthur Vance to tell him the deal was done, he was quiet for a moment. The Moretti Vance line? He finally said. Yes, sir, Elena replied, her heart pounding, and the Stella naming convention for all new ships from Genoa. There was another long pause. Elena feared she had overstepped, that she would be fired for her audacity. Then she heard a sound she had never heard before from Arthur Vance. A short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated victory. "Elena," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "When you get back to New York, we're having dinner. And this time, I'm clearing my own damn plate." 6 months later, the private dining room at the Pinnacle Club looked exactly the same. The same polished mahogany table, the same crystal glasses, the same hushed, reverent atmosphere. But for Elena Rostova, the entire universe had shifted. She was seated at the table, not standing beside it. She wore a dark blue Acris suit that had cost more than her old car. Across from her sat Arthur Vance. They weren't there for a tense negotiation, but a quiet celebration. The Moretti-Vance line had just posted its first quarterly results, and they had exceeded all projections. The integration was a success, hailed in the financial press as a model of cross-cultural acquisition. "I received a gift this morning," Vance said, sliding a small, elegant box across the table. Elena opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was an exquisite antique compass, its casing made of brass and its needle still true. The attached card was from Lorenzo Moretti. It read, "To the Dottoressa, our true north. You always know the way." Elena smiled, her heart full. "He is a good man. He is a good partner," Vance corrected, though not unkindly. "Thanks to you." He looked at her, his expression serious. "The board meeting is next Thursday. I'm putting your name forward for a permanent seat on the executive council." Elena was stunned. "Me? Sir, I've only been here 6 months. I'm the director of cultural liaisons." "You are my chief advisor," he stated, as if it were the most obvious fact in the world. "You've saved the Moretti deal. You've successfully mediated a labor dispute at our port in Marseille by explaining to me that the French unions weren't striking over money, but over a perceived slight to their professional dignity. You averted a PR crisis in Japan by pointing out that the marketing campaign was culturally tone-deaf. You don't just translate languages, Elena. You translate context. You translate people. That skill is rarer and more valuable than 100 MBAs like Richard Sterling. You've earned your seat at the table." A waiter approached the manager of the club himself. He was an older, distinguished man named Mr. Dubois, who had always been kind to Elena when she worked there. He looked at her now, sitting with Arthur Vance, and a look of dawning recognition and utter shock crossed his face. "Miss Rostova?" he stammered. "Is that you?" Elena smiled warmly. "Hello, Mr. Dubois. It's good to see you." I apologize," he said, addressing Vance. "I was not aware—" "Miss Rostova is my guest," Vance said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And she is one of the most valuable executives in my company. Please ensure she receives the best service your club has to offer." "Of course, Mr. Vance, immediately," Dubois said, nodding deferentially before scurrying away. The moment was not lost on Elena. The reversal of her fate was stark, almost comical. Here she was, being waited on in the very room where she used to clear crumbs, being lauded by the man whose fury had once terrified her. She thought of her father, of the promise she had made to him. She had given up her dream for him, the quiet, scholarly life she had planned. But in doing so, she had been forged into something stronger, something different. The real world in all its brutal, unforgiving reality had been a harsher but more profound teacher than any university. She had learned humility serving tables. She had learned empathy caring for her dying father. She had learned resilience from working 18-hour days. She had thought those years were a detour, a tragic derailment of her life, but she now understood they were her real education. They were what had allowed her to see what no one else in that room 6 months ago could see: the humanity behind the balance sheet. "A fleet of dead steel," she murmured, looking at Vance. He knew exactly what she meant. "You stopped me from building one," he admitted. "You reminded me that the soul of a company is its people." He raised his glass of water. "To Dr. Elena Rostova," he said, his glacial blue eyes filled with a look of profound, hard-won respect. "The woman with the Genoese soul who turned out to have the heart of a global enterprise." Elena raised her glass, the antique compass cool and solid in her other hand. She was no longer a ghost. She was no longer an imposter. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, a weaver of words and worlds, finally living a life even bigger than the one she had dreamed of. The evening air was cool on Elena's face as she stepped out from the gilded entrance of the Pinnacle Club. The city lights of Manhattan glittered around her, no longer an intimidating spectacle of power, but a familiar, welcoming landscape. The weight of the antique compass in her pocket was a grounding presence, a tangible link between her past, her present, and the incredible future that was just beginning to unfold. A black town car sent by Vance idled silently at the curb, its driver waiting patiently. Her new life. As she moved toward the car, a figure stepped out from the shadows of an adjacent building. He was leaning against the cold stone, his expensive suit rumpled and his tie askew. The arrogant, venomous glare was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out look of bitterness. It was Richard Sterling. "Well, well," he slurred, his voice rough with resentment and what smelled faintly of expensive whiskey. "Look what we have here. Dr. Rostova, descending from on high. I saw you through the window, having a cozy little dinner with the king." Elena stopped, her hand hovering over the car door handle. She felt a flicker of her old fear, the instinct of a waitress trying to avoid a difficult customer, but it was quickly replaced by a calm, steady resolve. She was not a waitress anymore. "Richard," she said, her tone even, "I hope you're doing all right." He let out a harsh, barking laugh. "All right, I'm doing just fantastic. I lost my job, my reputation, and my six-figure bonus all because some waitress decided to play translator. Do you have any idea what you did?" "I helped my employer save a billion-dollar acquisition," she replied simply, without malice. "No," he snarled, taking a stumbling step closer. "You played a part, a little sob story about your dead father and your PhD, and Vance ate it up. He loves charity cases. It makes him feel magnanimous. But don't you for a second think you belong in his world. It's a world of sharks, and you're just the flavor of the month. When the novelty wears off, when your cultural sensitivity fails to stop a hostile takeover, he'll discard you just as fast as he discarded me." He was trying to wound her, to plant a seed of the same doubt and insecurity that was now consuming him. He was trying to drag her back down into the invisibility from which she had emerged. 6 months ago, his words might have crippled her. But 6 months ago, she hadn't negotiated with Lorenzo Moretti, she hadn't rewritten a corporate contract, and she hadn't earned the respect of Arthur Vance. Elena looked at him, and for the first time, she felt not fear or anger, but a profound sense of pity. "You're wrong, Richard," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "The mistake you made wasn't the translation app. That was just a symptom. Your mistake was believing that respect is something you demand, instead of something you earn. You looked at the Morettis and saw an obstacle. I looked at them and saw a family. You see me as a charity case. Mr. Vance sees me as an asset. The world isn't just about sharks. It's about understanding what the other person values, what they fear, and what they hope for. That's not a soft skill. It's the most fundamental rule of business. It's just one you never bothered to learn." She gave him a final, sad nod. "I truly do hope you find your way." Without waiting for a reply, she turned, opened the door to the town car, and slid inside. As the car pulled away from the curb, she looked back and saw Richard Sterling standing alone on the sidewalk, a ghost of the past, swallowed by the shadows of the city. He had tried to haunt her, but she realized with sudden clarity that he was the one who was truly haunted. She, on the other hand, was finally free. Elena's story isn't just about speaking another language. It's a powerful reminder that our greatest strengths are often forged in our darkest hours. The skills she learned not in a boardroom, but through sacrifice, humility, and love, were the very things that made her invaluable. It shows us that true value isn't always found on a resume, but in the quiet resilience of the human spirit. There are people like Elena all around us. The barista who remembers your name, the janitor who works through the night, the assistant who anticipates every need, all with hidden talents and untold stories, waiting for a single moment to shine. Her story is a testament to the idea that it's never too late to reclaim your life, and that sometimes the most unexpected person in the room is the only one who can save it. If this story moved you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own hidden potential. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and amaze. Thank you for listening.